Then he growled with his Grinch fingers nervously drumming, "I must find some way to stop Christmas from coming." Perhaps you know these famous lines from the Dr. Seuss classic, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. You can probably still picture his creepy, curly smile when it says he got an idea, an awful idea. The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea. Well, in our passage today, King Herod got his own awful idea. The difference, of course, is that the Grinch is a made-up story while the birth of Jesus really happened. And the Grinch's idea of awful was to steal lights and bells and whistles, which couldn't stop Christmas at all. But King Herod's idea could have if he was able to pull it off. You see, Herod is not a comic villain. He's not a green grouch that's angry at commercialism. No, he's a historical tyrant, and his issue is not that he misunderstands Christmas, but that he understands it too well. The king has arrived. The Messiah has been born, and so to stop Christmas from coming, he must kill the Christ. Thankfully, Herod is not the only actor in the story. There's also a group of wise men, Magi from the east, and their heart is set on worshiping this true king. But of course, they are only people, and mere people can only do so much. There needs to be another actor in this narrative, and there is. And he is our sovereign God who guides all things. He controls travel routes and stars and dreams to make sure that the king is worshiped. God is going to see to it that Herod fails in his quest to stop Christmas from coming, and he'll see to it that the wise men are successful in worshiping the king. This morning, will you have the heart of Herod, or will you have the heart of the wise men from the east? The goal is that you would see how God revealed the king, how humanity responds, and how you are called to offer right worship. To see how God has revealed the king, how humanity responds to the king, and how we are all called to offer right worship to him. Let's begin by observing how God reveals the king. I hope you know that all things, all moments, every event that has ever taken place is moving towards something. That all of history is moving towards the worship of Jesus. Colossians 1 says, "For everything was created by him, in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him." In other words, every molecule that exists for the praise of Jesus. As we read last week, Paul writes in Philippians 2, "For this reason God highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." Jesus will be worshiped. So it's no wonder that God goes to great lengths here to reveal his Son. In some way beyond our comprehension, beyond our understanding, beyond what we can even picture or imagine in our minds, somehow God controls nature for the worship of his Son. In this case, he controls a star. Verses 1 through 2, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where's he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." Later in verses 9 and 10, after hearing the king, they went on their way, and there it was, the star that they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Now, despite what the Christmas carol tells us, these three kings were not three kings. And who knows if there were 3 of them or 30 of them? The text doesn't say. It simply says that they were wise men or magi from the east, which doesn't mean they have the kind of wisdom that Solomon had in the Old Testament that you might be familiar with, but it means that they were astrologers of sorts. They could read the skies and study the stars. And so apparently there's a star that has appeared to them in such a way that they know now that a king has been born. But how did this happen? How did the star appear so uniquely that they see it as a sign of a birth, and a noble's birth at that? How exactly did this star lead them to the general vicinity of the child? And then how did it go and stop right above where the baby was? How does that work? How does a star rise and go and direct and guide and stop over a little baby? I suppose in the same way that the fullness of God dwells in Jesus bodily, or in the same way that a virgin conceives and gives birth to a son. You see, this is not as simple as a few navigators with a map and a compass. This is our sovereign God who is controlling nature to direct people to come and worship the King. Now, he does more in this passage to reveal who the King is. But let's pause for just a moment and consider the weight of what's happening in Matthew's gospel. You have to keep in mind that Matthew is writing his gospel to a Jewish audience primarily. This book's purpose is to prove that Jesus is the King of the Jews, and yet the first people to worship him as the King of the Jews are a group of foreigners, wise men from the east. And they don't just happen upon this. They aren't just strolling through Bethlehem one day. No, from hundreds of miles away, God deliberately grabs their attention by controlling the stars. God's plan is for his son to be worshiped by the nations, and here he is controlling nature to ensure that it happens. So what kind of response does this demand from us? God also reveals the King by sending dreams. There are a total of 4 dreams that occur in chapter 2. The first one happens to the wise men. Their desire is to go and to worship Jesus, but Herod lies to them and gives them instructions that would actually prove dangerous if they go through with it, and there's no intervention. In verse 8, we read, Herod sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him." We can almost picture his evil grin as he says it. We can see a movie plot in front of us playing out, that this villain pretends to be the good guy, and so he sends these well-intending people to exploit their good motives. That when they find where the baby is and worship him, they'll go back to the villain so that he can go and worship them too, they think. So here we are. It could have been that these wise men were worshiping, reporting the location, only to find that at some point a black carriage arrives with an assassin to murder the child. Thankfully, that's not how the story goes, because God is sovereign, because God controls nature, and he sends dreams in this case. In verse 12, being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they return to their own country by another route. God sends a dream to these wise men to warn them so that the true king would not be killed in this moment, but known and worshiped by the masses. That's dream number 1. And then there's a second dream. This time it's given to Joseph. In verse 13, after they were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, "Get up, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to kill him." A second dream to protect the child and to reveal who the king is. And then we have a third dream, also given to Joseph. In verses 19 through 20, after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, because those who intended to kill the child are dead." And so we have movement again in the story, movement back to the land of Israel from Egypt, but they have to be careful here because Herod's son is now the one in charge, and so perhaps Bethlehem's not the best place to settle down. Which is why we get a fourth dream in verse 22. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the region of Galilee. controlling a star, sending dreams. God is ensuring here that the king would be known and worshiped. The question is, what kind of response does this demand from us? There's another list of 4 that occurs in this chapter of Matthew. Not only are there 4 dreams, but there are 4 prophecies that are fulfilled. I think there's a faulty way, well, I know there's a faulty way to view this chapter by envisioning God as reacting to everything. And so Herod intends to kill, so God reacts by sending a dream. Herod is finally dead, and so God thinks it's safe now and sends another dream for them to go home. But then, wait a minute, Herod's son is in charge, and so God reacts again by sending another dream to go to Galilee instead. This way of viewing the story pictures the villain in the driver's seat and God on the run. But that's not what's happening here at all. Instead, God is in control of the whole thing from start to finish. Every evil intention to kill the king brings about a fulfillment to reveal the king. Here's the first fulfillment. Herod hears about this king's birth, and he knows just enough to realize that it's the Messiah, but he doesn't know where to find the Messiah, and so he, with evil intentions in his heart, he grabs these religious leaders with a plot to place a pin on the map to kill this baby. And we get verses 4 through 6. He assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them where the Messiah would be born. In Bethlehem of Judea, they told him, because this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. The scribes know their Bibles well. They quote Micah chapter 5, verse 2, Bethlehem Ephrathah, you are small among the clans of Judah. One will come from you to be ruler over Israel for me. His origin is from antiquity, from ancient times. In other words, this small little town with a tiny little population that finds itself absent from major lists in the Bible is the city of David's birthplace, and it's the hometown of the Messiah. And so we find that Herod's wickedly intended question actually leads to a realization that Jesus is born right where the Old Testament says the Messiah would be born. Look at the second fulfillment, verses 12 through 14. After they were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, get up, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to kill him. And so he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and escaped to Egypt. And the question is, why? Because God is reacting to Herod? Is God afraid here? Is God not able to protect the baby even in Bethlehem? Does he have to go to Egypt to be safe? Or is there something deeper that's going on? Well, Matthew tells us, and by the way, always, always, always pay attention when the narrator gives you the why behind something. They escaped to Egypt. Why? Verse 15, he stayed there until Herod's death so that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled. Out of Egypt I called my son. Hosea 11 verse 1 says, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. So think about what's happening here. Jesus goes to Egypt, and the Father is going to call Jesus out of Egypt, just like he called the Israelites out of Egypt during the Exodus. If you don't know, the Exodus story is the greatest picture of redemption in the Old Testament. God anoints Moses to free his people from this Egyptian captivity and slavery. And ever since, the Israelites have been waiting for the one who would come after Moses to free the people from exile. And so, did Jesus go to Egypt because it was the only way that God knew how to protect him? Or was it so Jesus could be clearly revealed as the true and better Moses, the one who will free the people from their sins once and for all? You see, Herod's murderous desires to kill the king simply revealed the king instead. And then there's a third fulfillment that happens. We read of a devastatingly painful part of this story starting in verse 16. We see the wickedness of sin on display here. Then Herod, when he realized that he had been outwitted by the wise men, flew into a rage. He gave orders to massacre all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, in keeping with the time he had learned from the wise men. Then what was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be consoled because they are no more. This quote comes from Jeremiah chapter 31, and it speaks of Rachel in a metaphorical way as being the mother of Israel. We picture her weeping, and she's mourning because of the loss of her children. And this is when the Israelites were sent into exile. But in the next verses of Jeremiah chapter 31, God begins to comfort these mourners. Here's Jeremiah 31:17. But there is hope for your future. This is the Lord's declaration, and your children will return to their own territory. So the children have gone away, but they will return. There is hope for their future. You might even know that Jeremiah 31 goes on to give us this new covenant promise. It says, "This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days," the Lord's declaration. "I will put my teaching within them and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will one teach his neighbor or his brother, saying, 'Know the Lord,' for they will all know me, from the least to the greatest of them. This is the Lord's declaration, for I will forgive their iniquity and never again remember their sin." So how does this all fit together? What does it have to do with the massacre of these young boys in Bethlehem? Well, Herod's evil intentions had devastating consequences. He was so angry that he goes on this murderous rage and leaves a whole town of mothers in mourning. And we're left here realizing that there's nothing to be done about the reality of the death of these children. They are all gone, as the prophecy said. And yet it all happened to fulfill what Jeremiah wrote. And the silver lining is that Jeremiah didn't write about a hopeless mourning. He wrote about mourning that would turn into joy because there was hope for their future. The mourning mothers of Bethlehem would be comforted because of the hope that would come out of Egypt. You see, King Herod's rampage was evil and wicked, and God is going to judge him for it, but he was not able to kill the ultimate hope of a new covenant king who had finally come. And that leaves us with one more fulfillment, at least in chapter 2, because Matthew is covered with them. Verses 22 through 23. "But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, and being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the region of Galilee. Then he went and settled in a town called Nazareth to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene." One of the things I love about the Christian Standard Bible is that you can easily see when the Old Testament is being quoted. Every time a New Testament author quotes the Old Testament, you'll actually find it written in bold. And that's why verse 6, if you have a CSB version, is in bold. It's why verse 15 that we talked about is in bold. It's why verse 18 is in bold, but verse 22 is not. Why? Because Matthew clearly says that they settled in a town called Nazareth to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. And yet there's no direct Old Testament prophecy that says the Messiah king would be called a Nazarene. You have to remember that there's always a reason, because God doesn't lie. God is not out to confuse you, and you can always trust his word. And so would you do a little Bible study with me here and observe a key detail that we find in the passage. In verse 5, Matthew says, "Because this is what was written by the prophet." Prophet is singular. In verse 15, "So that what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet." In verse 17, "Then what was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled." In each of these instances, and sprinkled all throughout Matthew's gospel, he usually mentions a singular prophet when quoting from the Old Testament, because it can easily be traced to something Jeremiah said or Hosea or Micah. One of them directly said it. But in verse 23, he abandons this usual formula, and this time he went and settled in a town called Nazareth to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. Matthew uses plural here, and you might be wondering, really, Matt, is this English class? And no, it's not. But God has communicated to us through a book, and the answer is often right before us if we simply look and look and look some more. That's the beauty of having God's word in a book that's been given to us, so we can all look and look some more and confirm what's really there. Matthew's departure in this instance from quoting a specific prophet is his way of admitting that he's not quoting a specific prophet. Instead, he seems to be alluding to the general message of the prophets that they gave concerning the Messiah, that he would be one who is rejected. Remember, Nazareth was a despised town. In the Gospel of John, Nathanael hears about the Messiah being in Nazareth, and he famously asks, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" I'm sure you all have places in mind that are like that, don't you? Can anything good really come out of that town or out of that city? That's exactly what's happening here. Isaiah 53:3, he was despised and rejected by men. So, was King Herod in the driver's seat? Was God on the run when Herod's son gained power and Joseph was told to go to Nazareth? Or was it to fulfill the prophecies that were made, that the Messiah was not to be born in a mansion and raised in a castle, that he wouldn't be Jerusalem's next top prospect? No, he would be despised. He would be rejected by men. He would be called, of all things, a Nazarene. Imagine that. A king who would be hated and despised and yet still came to die for those who hated him. Now, what kind of response does that demand from us? You see, God controls nature, and he sends dreams, and he fulfills prophecies to reveal the king and to result in the king's worship. But here's the thing, he hasn't stopped revealing the king. God is still sending missionaries to the ends of the earth for Jesus to be worshiped. God is still establishing churches and hard-to-reach places for Jesus to be worshiped. He's still placing faithful moms and grandmothers in people's lives so that Jesus would be worshiped. He's still sending friends to you so that you'll worship Jesus. He's planted a church in your city or in your neighborhood so that you would worship Jesus. And don't you know that he's orchestrated all the events of your life, the good and the bad, the ones that make you laugh and the ones that make you cry, so that you would worship Jesus? My friend, what kind of response does this demand from you? While we're on the topic, let's look at how the people respond to the king now. There's three kinds of responses that we see in chapter 2. The first response to all of this is indifference. In verse 4, I don't know if you noticed this, but Herod assembles the chief priests and the scribes, those who watch over the religious proceedings, those who are experts in the religious law. Of course, these people would know where the Messiah is to be born, and so King Herod asks the question, the religious leaders answer it, and then what do? I mean, surely they jump to their feet and they book the next ride to Bethlehem. Or at least they start packing their bags and telling their families that word just came in that the Messiah might be here. They don't do any of these things. They were reading their religious texts. They were asked a religious question. They gave the right religious answer, and they went back to their old religious ways. What kind of heart is so knowledgeable of the greatest truth, but so cold towards it? Beware of indifference. Beware of the heart that can win at Christmas trivia, but have more joy in knowing the facts than the Savior. Beware of the heart that knows the stuff and has heard it all before and grew up around it, yet isn't moved by it. What is it if their heads were stuck in the Bible, but their hearts had no love for what they read? If you heard Jesus is here tonight, somewhere in High Point, would you drop everything and go to spend time with him? Or would you make sure you still had time to watch the game and get the kids in bed and do some last-minute Christmas shopping? So far in this sermon, we've seen incredibly profound truths about Jesus, the Messiah King. And the first application here is to not have your heart respond with indifference towards him. There's another response, and it comes from King Herod, and it's hostility. Look at verses 2 through 3. The wise men show up and ask, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." King Herod heard this. He was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. He was deeply disturbed at this information, afraid even. So much so that he murders a whole town of boys under the age of 2. Reminds me of my friend Nate Emanuel's song, "Afraid of Christmas." It says, "Have you all the heart of Herod? Hark the herald angels sing tonight. Could it be that you're scared of the blessed baby king's arrival? Who's afraid of Christmas? Why are you afraid of Christmas anyway?" We listen to that song with our as a family, and our youngest are often confused. Why does Nate keep saying, "Who's afraid of Christmas"? No one's afraid of Christmas. But King Herod was. And aren't there others that have the heart of Herod? Afraid because if King Jesus reigns as supreme, then King Herod won't be in charge anymore. Or to put it another way, you and I won't be in charge anymore. The arrival of Jesus is a confrontation. Yes, he is a king who saves, but he only saves those who surrender. And if we want to remain the king or the Lord or the God of our own lives, then the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and the only true God is a threat to us. And so if you are here this morning and you're not a Christian, be honest with yourself for just a moment. It's possible that you might have some genuine questions about the faith and you want somebody to give you some genuine answers, and that's good. But could it be that the real reason you don't believe is because there's something you don't want to give up in order to follow Jesus? Could it be that the kingship of Christ poses a threat to your own kingdom and you don't want him to reign just yet? Maybe one day you'll settle down and let Jesus rule as supreme in your heart, but not today. Could it be that that's the real root? If you are here this morning aware of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done, but he's not your Lord and he's not your King, then you're not a Christian. Indifference or hostility. We see it all over today, these different responses. And my prayer is that one of those two responses is in your heart, that it would vanish and be replaced by genuine worship. And of course, worship is the third response to see. It comes from the Magi. In verse 2, "For we saw his star at its rising, and we have come to worship him." And so we come to the third emphasis in this text, the point that all the others are pointing to. We should see how God reveals the King, how people respond to the King, and then we should be moved to right worship of the King. This passage tells us a lot about worship, and it certainly is not limited to the time that the worship team is leading us in music. In fact, you can be singing a worship song and not worshiping God at all. And so what do we learn here? First, we learn that true worshipers call Jesus King, and they mean it. Verse 2, one more time. "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." This is a stark contrast from the Jews in the end when they crucify him and say, no, it shouldn't say King of the Jews. It should say he said he was King of the Jews. The Magi are admitting this is King of the Jews. There's always an outward confession that Jesus is King, an outward acknowledgement that he is the one in charge and that we are not. Jesus asked Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." There's a confession there. Romans 10:9, "If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." True worshipers of God have a confession that Jesus is the King because they truly believe that Jesus is the one who reigns. But they don't just say this with their lips. They back it up with their lives. They don't just call him King. They submit to him as Lord. Here's what verse 11 says about the moment that the wise men laid eyes on the baby. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshiped him. They worshiped him by falling down. In Revelation chapter 19, verse 10, John was about to fall to his knees before an angel messenger. And here's what happens. I fell at the feet to worship him, but he said to me, "Don't do that. I am a fellow servant with you and your brothers and sisters who hold firmly to the testimony of Jesus. Worship God." So when a mere man begins to fall to his knees before an angel, the angel rebukes him. Instead, he should worship God, not the angel. Because falling to our knees in worship is what we do to signify that God is God and we are not. That He is high and lifted up and we are the works of His hands. He is Lord and we are in submission to Him. True worship acknowledges out loud that Jesus is King and then falls to submit to Him as Lord. Third, true worshipers respond to Jesus with a life of worship. In verse 11, the wise men opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. There was all kinds of debate about what these gifts could mean, what they signify, if they have any significance at all. The truth be told, Matthew doesn't tell us, and so we're trying to pull clues from elsewhere, but at the very least, we can know that these gifts were not cheap. They were expensive. These men gave their best. There is a response to the glories of Christ. We don't offer something to Him as though He needs something from us, but we do offer something to Him because of what He's done for us. And ultimately, we offer Jesus our whole selves, our whole lives. We hold nothing back. Here's how Paul says it, and he links it directly to worship in Romans 12, that therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. So worship goes beyond saying the right things and assuming the right posture and singing the right songs on Sunday morning. Your true worship is presenting your bodies as a living sacrifice to Him. It's a whole life lived for God. Nothing off limits. Nothing that He can't have control over. Which means your marriage offered to God. Your parenting offered to God. What you find entertainment in offered to God. Your thought life offered to God. What you look at or sing about offered to God. What talents and abilities that you've been given offered to God as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing unto Him. That is true worship, a whole life lived for Jesus. The question is, does He get our best or our leftovers? Lastly, true worship is finding your joy in Christ. When they hear about the star and the king, they have a different response than Herod. When Herod heard about the star, when Herod hears about the king, he's deeply disturbed. But look at the wise men in comparison in verse 10. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. In other words, true worship is not just saying that He's king because you rehearsed to say that. It's not just falling before Him because you read about how to do that once. It's being overwhelmed with joy so that you can't help but confess His kingship and you can't help but submit to His lordship. It's not that the right words and actions led to joy. It's that joy was at the root of the whole thing. What makes a child happy? Playing catch because you have to? Playing catch because you want to? What honors a wife? Dating her again this week because you need to meet your quota of designated date nights this month? Or because you want to spend time with her? And what glorifies God the most? Doing something just because you're supposed to or because you find Him to be your greatest treasure? This means that if you want to call him king even more and want to submit to him even more, want to offer him yourself even more, you must strive each and every day to place the glories of Jesus in front of you so that you find him to be your deepest delight. Some of you might be trying to worship from a place of to-do lists and check boxes, when you need to worship from a place of joy instead. Sometimes you have to do the to-do list. Sometimes you have to do the check boxes until the joy comes again. But don't settle for worship detached from wonder. Ask God to restore to you the joy of your salvation. So like the wise men, you yourself would be overwhelmed with joy. And friends, that's what we close with this Advent series. The King was promised. The King is present, and the King is to be praised. Therefore, see how God has revealed this King. See how humanity responds to him, and see that your rightful response is to offer joyful worship, your whole life for the rest of your life. Let's pray.